for the first time. It was not what I expected. The show aired from 1982 to 1988 for 6 seasons, and walking in, I thought it was going to be like a 30-minute sitcom similar to Scrubs, but just in the 80s. Whew, I was very wrong. I also got really confused about the cast. I had somehow merged the cast from Grey's Anatomy with ER, and in my mind really thought this was St. Elsewhere. So the cast really blew my mind, and I'm going to get into the cast in just a second, but St. Elsewhere is actually a hour-long, it's almost like a procedural TV show just in a hospital setting. It has a very serious tone. It's often compared to Hill Street Blues, which I've also not seen, but it's on my watch list. I was going to compare it to like Law and Order. It's a very serious show. Some of the patients and arcs of the story can go on for the entire season or at least a few episodes, which I thought was very surprising. So I'm going to talk about the cast. St. Elsewhere is about a hospital, St. Eligius, which is owned by the Boston Diocese. For most of the seasons, there's a little bit towards the end where it's bought by a different organization. And the vast majority of the doctors are interns, and you have like 3 kind of head doctors, and there are also some nurses that comprise your main cast. And then there are, of course, patients who are guest stars. So your 3 heads are Dr. Westfall, who is the director of St. Eligius. He's a single father of 2, most notably his son Tommy Westfall becomes very important, particularly as it pertains to the infamous or famous, depending on whether or not you liked it, ending of the show. He's a really kind person, but very serious. He always does his best to kind of help people and protect the hospital. Then you have William Daniels, Mr. Feeney, Kit himself, who plays Dr. Craig, who's like this egotistical, kind of racist homophobe, so I was really surprised to see him in that role. And his real-life wife, Bonnie Bartlett, played his wife on the show. She was also his wife in Boy Meets World. I didn't know this, but they've actually been married since 1951, so they've been married, as of next year, it'll be 70 years, so they've probably been together even longer than that. That's really amazing. And then last of the 3 main doctors is Dr. Auslander, and he's played by Norman Lloyd. He's the chief of services. For the beginning, towards like season 3, he has, I believe, liver cancer. He does survive, and he's in all 6 seasons. He's actually still alive today. He is 105 years old, which is also very impressive. Then we get to the nurses. The head nurse is the head nurse is Nurse Rosenthal. She is this really compassionate, hardworking woman who's pretty stern, which makes her a very good nurse. The first season she develops breast cancer and ends up having a mastectomy, and then later she has, I believe in season 2, reconstructive surgery. And I think towards the later seasons, at one point, she develops an addiction to prescription pills. And season 3, she organizes a nursing strike. She's a very prominent character throughout the series. She's one of my favorites. I really liked her. She has a kind of ups and downs as a character. She's not perfect, but I think she's a very interesting person. Then there's also Nurse Daniels. Okay, I'm going to get into her more when I talk about Dr. White, but her storyline kind of bothered me. So as for the doctor interns, I think the most notable doctor is Morrison, aka Boomer. I almost said Moose. His name is David, the actor who plays him is David Morris. He's kind of like the moral center of the show. He is this very gentle, earnest person. There are some kind of questions regarding his skills and abilities as a doctor. He's definitely not the best. He might not have even gone to an accredited school, which comes up into play later. But he's generally the kind of the doctor that's focused on a lot more than some of the others in the beginning, although that does kind of ebb away later on as some of the other doctors get more of a spotlight, which I really liked. And then his storyline kind of takes a turn in season 4, but we're going to get back to that when I start talking about Dr. White, because I don't know if you're picking up on this, but I got a lot of freaking things to say about Dr. White. I'm, oddly enough, a really big fan of Ed Begley Jr., and he plays Dr. Ehrlich. He's kind of under the tutelage of Dr. Craig. There are a lot of jokes made about him, like at his expense, so he's not necessarily the comedic relief. That's who I'm going to talk about next, but he is pretty funny. His character is an orphan. That comes into being a whole hilarious story in that his parents actually were spies in real life, which is weird and hilarious. He's a Californian in Boston, and he always wears shirts like this. And he's not as egotistical as Dr. Craig, but he's always trying to impress him, which kind of leads to them getting annoyed with each other a lot, which I think is kind of fun. So Dr. Fiscus is the comic relief, and he's played by Howie Mandel. I was really surprised to see him in this. I actually didn't know that he'd ever been in any TV shows. Which is the same for the character I'm going to talk about next, too. So he's definitely the comic relief. I would say he's my favorite of the doctors. He does seem to be the most skilled of them. He's an ER doctor, and he's always kind of very laid back. He's a really great bedside manner. He's always helping out patients, and to me, he seems by far and away to be not only the best doctor, but kind of just in general, generally the best person. He's a little bit annoying sometimes, particularly as it pertains to like how he's flirting with women. But he's a good guy at the end of the day. The next doctor was the one I was the most surprised with, which was Dr. Chandler, who's played by Denzel Washington. I definitely didn't know he'd ever been in any TV shows. And you know what? That show wasted Denzel. Like, he didn't get any big storylines. I was so disappointed. He was talk about the most underutilized. I was blown away. How you have a Denzel and not use a Denzel. Later on, they bring in Mark Harmon, who plays Dr. Caldwell. At the time, I think he was actually in, I don't know what magazine does The Sexiest Man Alive, but he was in that at that time, so he was like a pretty big hit. I guess he came in season 2, and he was there until season 4. His character gets diagnosed with HIV, and that leads to like some issues. And in the 80s, of course, this was a really big topic. So this show was definitely tackling a lot of issues, which I'll get into. So then we have Dr. White. Okay. So he started off as kind of an annoying character who's always like trying to get people to take his shifts because he doesn't have time to do things. He is married at the beginning and has children. He just kind of jumped off the edge of being an annoying character right into being the worst character imaginable, in that he starts breaking a lot of rules and then just literally becomes a serial rapist. I'm not exaggerating. It is a big major story arc of season 2 that he is a serial rapist, and it leads into season 3. And after he gets caught and he is arrested, he ends up getting off, and St. Elijah's ends up having to rehire him, and he's allowed to maintain his position, which is disgusting. And the worst part is that's pretty realistic. Then they have, I'm not kidding, season 3 major story arc is not only that, but also there is a copycat rapist. I don't understand why the show about a hospital is so rapey. Why? So going back up to Nurse Daniels, who I mentioned earlier, she ends up shooting and killing Dr. White and going to prison for it. And I really hated how this was portrayed, in that all of these doctors hated Nurse Daniels for literally killing a rapist who they accepted. And that really irked me. I cannot convey to you how much. And going back up to Dr. Morrison, he ends up getting, he ends up really defending Dr. White, as that was pretty much his best friend, despite the fact that he knows for a fact that he had raped all these women. And I talk about victim okay. So anyway, in season 4, he ends up getting sexually assaulted himself. And then he leaves, and I guess they wrote him off for like half of the season because he went off to do another project. So then when he returns in season 5, a major storyline is the PTSD that he has over his assault. And it's like, I don't understand how you got 4 seasons out of rape for a show about a hospital. What even? That's insane. Well, anyway, that's there are a couple other main doctors, but those are the main ones that I wanted to discuss in terms of the cast, and then I'll just kind of briefly go through each season about the main kind of topics that were discussed and shown in the show. So again, I went into this show thinking it was going to be like Scrubs, but in the 80s. So the first episode, which is kind of a 2-episode arc, it is about terrorism with Tim Robbins as the terrorist who like set up a bomb, and the doctors have this ethical dilemma in that, you know, some of these people, he killed people, and yet they've saved his life, and that, you know, and doctors don't really get to make that decision. And then, like, episode 4 literally had me crying because this homeless woman had frostbite and had developed, was going to have both of her feet amputated, but she decided not to because, one, she just didn't really have that kind of option, and the man that she loved wasn't stable, and that he wouldn't be able to take care of himself, and she didn't want to leave him. And so, knowing she was going to die, she still decided to leave to be with him. Done. Over. Heartbreaking. And then we, like I said earlier, Nurse Rosenthal discovers she has breast cancer. We have a pregnant woman who finds out that her child will be born with Down syndrome. There's the death of a child. There's this racial tension, which turns out to be a cover-up for child abuse. And that's just the first season. The second season, as I said, had this big, has a big story arc regarding Dr. White being a sexual assaulter, but there's also one revolving around the hospital is supposed to have this nuclear contingency plan, but Dr. Westfall is really against it, and that creates some contention between him and some other people in the city. Then there are a lot of talk about AIDS, and there is a trans woman who is going in to begin having operations to transition, and it is the most dated thing I have ever seen, but they had good intentions, I guess. There's an episode regarding one of the nurses who is hearing impaired, and kind of about like ADA and HIPAA. There's misdiagnosis. There's death of Morrison's wife. They do have a son, so he's left a single father. There's going on abuse of power, going back to Dr. White. He not only is a sexual assaulter, but he was also abusing prescriptions and giving them out to people he shouldn't, and then using him when he shouldn't be himself, which leads to him and someone else getting in trouble. And then there's a doctor at one point who's suffering from an eating disorder, which would probably be really stressful. Season 3 sees, like I said, the copycat sexual assaulter, and brings into the forefront like the injustice of the legal system regarding that sort of thing. Oh, dearie dear. There's also a large storyline regarding these firefighters who are very injured. One of whom dies, one becomes addicted to painkillers, and one is Ernie Hudson. He never gets a break. It's real sad. This season sees the nurses strike and kind of shows the unfair labor practices and that nurses endure, which I thought was pretty good to show. Season 4 depicts the aftermath of a shooting, which it shows a lot more of like the homeless population of the area, which is, I think the show actually does a lot and really quite well. And then, as I said, there's the issue with Dr. Morrison getting assaulted during Westfall's community project, which causes that to be shut down. It had great intentions, but obviously had a really terrible, terrible outcome. And then season 5 brings Dr. Morrison back with a new wife and stepchildren, and he is suffering from PTSD. So then we have Fiscus gets shot and he has surgery, and then that leads to a dream sequence episode that I kind of liked. And then he ends up like carrying a gun around, and then one of the doctors starts selling body parts on the black market, which is really gross. And there's one episode that kind of discusses like this group has a very stringent religious beliefs regarding what doctors can and cannot do, which I think that if this show were made now would probably be a lot more prevalent due to like anti-vaxxers and such. And then at the end, St. Eligius is in trouble and needs saving from being demolished, which brings us into our last season, which is season 6, where St. Eligius has been bought and Dr. Westfall leaves because he can't open an AIDS clinic, which is really ironic considering how Dr. Caldwell was treated after his diagnosis. Not treated like medically, treated like professionally. Gosh, there's like, they cover like gay bashing, drug abuse, the loss of a child, and we get to the famous last episode, episode 137, where St. Eligius is sold back to the Boston Diocese, Westfall is reinstated, and in the final moments we see that St. Eligius is actually in the mind of Dr. Westfall's son, who has autism, Tommy Westfall, and he's been imagining the whole thing as he stares into a snow globe, and that creates the Tommy Westfall universe, which has apparently like 250 shows, of which all I can name is Cheers. Oh, whoa, if it's Cheers, and it's also Frasier, so I can name 2. But there's a whole big conspiracy theory. I'll link it below. I don't know. The show is really weird, and it's odd. The 80s were a weird time. How it simultaneously is so serious and so bizarre. Like, what were your choices? How can you have such a serious show but be so over the top like a soap opera like this? I don't know. I mean, I guess I watched the thing, so I liked it enough to sit through it, but I think I was just kind of watching it more out of like, I'm so flabbergasted by these decisions that I have to know the outcome. But that's also how I've watched any soap opera, so I don't think that says much. Anyway, what are your thoughts on St. Elsewhere, if you've seen it? And yeah, have a great day.